Well, hello, my brilliant friends. My name is Todd Henry, and I am the author of several books: The Accidental Creative, Die Empty, Louder Than Words, Herding Tigers, and the new book, The Motivation Code. And today we're going to talk specifically about what it is that motivates or what drives your best creative work. Now, when we talk about motivation, I think often we talk very abstractly about the concept of motivation. What does it really mean to be motivated? To be motivated means that you bring discretionary energy to your work. Discretionary energy, meaning that you're going to spend a little bit longer doing something. You're going to stay with a problem a little bit later than others might stay with the problem. You're going to put more of your emotional labor, as Lewis Hyde would call it, into solving the problem. We all know that if we want to do brilliant creative work, it requires us spending ourselves on behalf of the work. We have to be willing to take risks, to try new things. We have to be willing to stay with problems far after others have given up. So the question is, where does motivation come from? How do we tap into that deep well of emotional labor, of energy to help us do our best work? Well, there are primarily three things that we rely on to do our work. The first is skills, of course. We have to have the skills necessary to do the creative work that we're tasked with. We also have to have experience, meaning that we can see nuance, that we can understand patterns, we can see reality beyond what's in front of us. We can begin to think more systemically. And that's what experience does for us. As we grow in maturity as creative professionals, we begin to see patterns that others gloss over, that others simply don't realize even exist. So skills and experience are important, but motivation is often the missing key for brilliant work. You can, of course, have in your work skills, you can have experience, but if you lack the motivation to do the work, it's going to be what I call grind work. It's work that you have to do and you do it because you have to do it, but you don't necessarily put your full energy and your full effort into it. It's not going to be satisfying work in the same way that work you're motivated to do will be. Of course, we can also have the experience we need and we can have the motivation, but lack the skills that we need to be able to produce great work. And this work is going to be poor work. We're not going to do high quality work if we don't have the skills necessary to deliver results. And then, of course, we can have the skills and we can have the motivation, but lack the experience. And frankly, this is where a lot of people who are early in their career are as professionals. We have skill. Maybe we're very talented and we have motivation to get it right and we understand how to tap that motivation, but we lack the experience to understand not just what we can do, but what we should do. And in this case, it will result in immature work. Work that might exhibit some talent, but doesn't necessarily exhibit the kind of nuance that we need in order to be able to set ourselves apart from the competition. So skills, experience, and motivation. These are the three primary tools that we need in order to produce great work. So the biggest enigma, I think, for many of us is motivation. We know how to develop skills and we know how to gain experience, but how do we tap into motivation? So let's dive a little bit further into motivation and talk about some practical skills to help us identify what drives us. Traditionally, we have thought of motivation as primarily residing in two camps. Extrinsic motivation, meaning all of the external forces that drive us. So things like pay raises, words of encouragement, things of that nature that spur us on to act. And intrinsic motivation, which is primarily the inner drivers that animate our work, that keep us engaged. And we have tended to think about motivation as primarily existing of these two types of motivation that are discrete from one another. Right? So you have extrinsic motivation, you have intrinsic motivation, and they're kind of different categories. But the reality is that intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation modify one another. That the way I respond to an extrinsic source of stimulus will be different than the way that you respond because we're likely differently motivated. So you might try to motivate me with a pay raise, but I might not care about that pay raise if primarily what I want to do is be a part of a high-functioning team. That's what really animates my best work, is when I'm part of a high-functioning team. Or similarly, maybe you don't care about teams, and I try to put you on a high-functioning team to motivate you, and you're like, just give me the money. I just want a pay raise. That's what's going to animate me because it shows that you're recognizing that I am excelling at what I do. So once we begin to understand this interaction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, it changes how we interact with one another. And especially for those of us who lead other people, it helps us lead them in a more meaningful way. So in my book, The Motivation Code, my colleagues and I analyzed over 50 years of research into motivation, over 100,000 interviews with people, and over 1 million achievement stories to look for patterns in how people talk about what it is that truly drives them. And what we discovered is that there's a thing called motivation code. It's the unique, sustained, unchanging drive that is the source of your deepest engagement. When you're operating within your motivation code, you will feel more engaged, you will bring more discretionary energy to the table, and at the end of the day, you're going to produce better, more sustainable work. Now, there are 27 themes of motivation that we discovered, and they live within 6 families. We do not have time to talk about all of those. So what I'm going to do is teach you a practical, actionable way that you can begin to get to some of these conversations about motivation as kind of a shortcut. Now, we do have an assessment. If you want to take the assessment, you can do that at motivationcode.com to really identify it. But let me teach you a practical way to talk about motivation with your team, or to do this on your own. Primarily, it centers around what we call achievement stories. What we discovered is that when people talk about moments of achievement in their life, a time when they accomplished something that mattered a lot to them, and then they describe that moment of achievement, it often resonates with whatever it is that truly motivates them. They're often talking about those themes that drive and animate their best work. So here's how you begin to identify your motivation code. The first thing you do is you think of a time when you accomplished something meaningful in your life. Now, it doesn't matter if it's something that was meaningful to others. It doesn't matter if anybody else even knew about it. What matters is that the moment was meaningful to you in some way. It could be something from school when maybe you got a good grade on an exam. It could be a moment that you won a new client for your organization. It could be about a project that you created that nobody else ever saw. It doesn't matter. Think of a time when you achieved something that mattered a lot to you, that meant a lot to you, where you felt deeply engaged, deeply gratified for having achieved that accomplishment. Now, here's what you're going to do. I want you to describe what you actually did. Were you working with other people in the course of that? And was that a part of it? Did you do it on your own? What were the specific things that you did to contribute to the success? Maybe, for example, maybe it was an exam that you took in school and you got a good grade on. Maybe what you did is you spent months studying for that exam and getting prepared for it. And it really was the preparation that you're most proud of. Or maybe it could be that you took the exam, but you didn't study, but somehow you managed to get a good grade anyway. But think about what you actually did. Okay, now here's what you're going to do next. I want you to describe why it was meaningful for you. Why was that particular accomplishment something that sticks in your mind, something that remains with you to this day? Can you begin to identify some of the themes within that accomplishment that were meaningful to you? Again, maybe it was that you were the one who checked it off the list and got it done, even though everybody else told you couldn't. Maybe you had to overcome some obstacle in order to accomplish it. Maybe you were challenged in some way and you met the challenge. Maybe it was that you worked with a group of high-functioning individuals in order to accomplish it. Maybe it was that you were recognized for what you did. Maybe it was that you got to stand in the spotlight and deliver. Why was that moment especially meaningful for you? What did it mean to you in that moment? And then I want you to think about how that applies to your work right now. Are you seeing any opportunities in your work right now to apply those themes that mattered so much to you in those moments of accomplishment? So let's say, for example, that being a part of a high-functioning team is what motivated you in that achievement story. Are you getting opportunities right now to be part of a high-functioning team? Maybe it was that you got to present the material, but now you're kind of in a role where you're in the background. Maybe you can work with your manager to negotiate opportunities for you to be able to be in the spotlight more consistently if that's what it is that truly animates your best behavior. So when you look at these patterns, I want you to think about, how do these patterns play out in my work? Or do they play out, or do they not play out? How do they apply to the moments in my work, my current work, where I felt most engaged or least engaged? And by the way, have this conversation with your team as well. If you're a manager, talk with them about moments when they've achieved something, about the patterns in those moments and how they apply to their work right now. And then finally, and most importantly, begin to craft your role. And what I mean by this is, begin to think of ways you can incorporate that motivation into your day-to-day work. Maybe, for example, it's working with a team. You need to find ways to work with individuals to get things done because that's when you're most engaged. That's when you bring your best effort to the table, right? Maybe you need to start thinking about ways that you can step into the spotlight. Maybe you need to look for obstacles or challenges. Maybe you're motivated by learning things. Maybe that's what drives those moments of achievement. And you need to find ways of learning new skills and teaching those skills to other people because that's what really animates your best work, your deepest engagement. When we begin to identify that and then bring that to what we do every single day, it completely changes the game for us, and it will change the game for our organization as well as we begin to identify and tap into the unique motivations of the people on our team. You see, here's the thing. We tend to wait around to be motivated, but we have it backwards. You don't wait to be motivated. Don't wish you were motivated. You can bring motivation to your work. And when we do that, it brings deeper engagement, a deeper sense of satisfaction, and frankly, better creative output because we're going to bring more discretionary energy to our work every single day. So don't wish you were motivated. Bring motivation to your work. It's been a real joy to be with you. Thank you so much. If you want to know more, just visit motivationcode.com.